We go to a guy who is the Assistant U.S. Attorney and gives us the real lowdown on everything legal and law related, breakdown on the courts, breakdown on SCOTUS, breakdown on obstruction of justice, and all the things that we now sort of have to become quasi-conversant with. How about it for David Katz, everyone? Yeah. David, you look good. And this, if you're a gambling man, you might have bet against this connection being so good, but you look terrific, my friend.
Well, it's great to be with all of you.
Yeah. David sounds great too. All right. So there's so much to get to, and I'll let you lead us to what you feel are some of the major legal landmarks of the last week or so. I know there was a major SCOTUS ruling. I know there is the Meadows destruction of documents. I mean, I think that that would suggest a clear obstruction of justice, although I also see maybe a way that they could wriggle away with it, saying that he wasn't destroying the originals, he was destroying copies or whatever. Take us where you want, and then even if there's time, George Santos and the lies he told, and now that there may actually be ways to legally hold him to account for some of these lies he told on the congressional stump.
Well, let's take him up with any questions that you have or that your viewers and listeners have. But I think that the SCOTUS one is really important. I don't think anyone comes out looking great from that. I basically comment on the legal ramifications, but certainly there's a political and policy background. All the years that we've tried to have an accord on immigration, a stiffer border enforcement, but also a pathway to citizenship. And basically the politicians failed. I mean, on both sides, and they can blame it on each other. And, I tend to blame it on the Republican intransigence and insistence on border security. But we are where we are. And so people in Central America, in Mexico, but in other parts of the world too, have perceived that when Title 42 restrictions are lifted, that this will be a boom time to come into the United States. And so one of the problems is you have, apart from all of the law, you have all of these people that are massing along the border that are ready to come in through places like southern Texas and other parts along the border. And so this was something that Fox could, of course, play to their advantage, that there was going to be this inundation, even above the normal numbers that come in, that people were getting ready for Title 42 to be taken off. Now, not to get too into the weeds, but Title 42 is very important. Basically, Trump exploited a very old law to say that there was a health need to not let people come into the country, even asylum seekers. Of course, one of the huge political debates are 2% of these people real asylum seekers in the traditional sense, or are 50% of them? Obviously, you feel differently if you think 50% of these people are entitled to asylum of the 2 million deluge that would come in, or do you think that only 1 or 2% would really be entitled to asylum at the end of the day? I don't need to get into that, but the reason that people were not allowed to come in at all and that they were forced to wait outside the United States, even if they were asylum seekers, was because they were a health risk under COVID. But the CDC and the Biden administration said, no, we really passed the worst of the COVID pandemic, and therefore the emergency at the border cannot be supported by the emergency under COVID any longer. Meaning, if there was some other law to keep these people out or to make them go through asylum restrictions, either at the border, or let's say they had set up a vigorous program down in Mexico to actually vet them, but none of that happened. So from the Republicans' point of view, Biden was in charge. The Democrats controlled both houses of Congress. They had 2 years. They could see that COVID was diminishing, right? And they didn't do anything about it. From the Democrats' point of view, the Republicans weren't humanitarian. They would never join any program to do anything sensible about this. But here we are. So the Supreme Court, the wags say, now have saved the Democrats from themselves. They've saved the Democrats from the political embarrassment of having Fox have nothing but cameras at the border showing this deluge of people coming in wave after wave after wave, day after day. That was about to happen just a few days ago until Chief Justice Roberts first stated it. And now by a 5-4 vote, the Supreme Court said, we are not going to allow people in, despite the fact that it looks like the pandemic is over. We're going to keep in place the restrictions on them coming in based on health, even though a lot of people think that that's bogus. In fact, the 4 dissenters, one of them was a conservative. One of them was Gorsuch, said that, look, one emergency that we haven't dealt with this deluge that's about to come in cannot be dealt with by another emergency when that emergency, COVID restrictions, have lapsed. And since there was no policy, Gorsuch and the other three basically said, we're not the policy makers of last resort, we're a court of law. But they lost. The five in the majority have now stopped this, quote, deluge from coming in, this huge invasion that Fox was going to show day after day at the border. And that's why the WAGs say that to some extent, the Supreme Court majority, 5-4, has saved the Democrats from themselves. Because one of the ironies is that when this issue came up, you would expect maybe the Biden administration, Mark, would have said, you know what? It's not supported by COVID anymore. This is just a fig leaf. This is just a way to keep all these people out. You need to allow Title 42 to go out, those restrictions to go out. If the people are coming here seeking asylum, let them come. That's not what the Biden administration said. The Biden administration actually welcomed this further stay. And of course, that's back to the original problem that no one has dealt with this deluge that's going to come in. The irony is that some of the countries that people come from are not covered. So not all the countries are covered. And the reason is because when they send the person back to Mexico, will Mexico take them? Mexico will take Mexicans. It will take most of the Central Americans. It won't take the Cubans. It won't take people from all over the world. So those people, ironically, can still come in. But a large, large segment of that, whatever it is, 1 or 2 million people that was all primed to cross the border, now cannot come in, even if they're a legitimate asylum seeker. That's what the liberals go crazy. How about the ones who are legitimate asylum seekers and can't come in to make their asylum petitions? And yet we've never set up anything effective. You know, if people do a lot of things now by the internet. We haven't set up some way, let's say by the internet, that these people can make their legitimate asylum petitions from abroad. You know, that's totally not been given attention.
Well, I mean, you mentioned so many things here that are so pertinent, and I'll just take the last one. You know, the asylum courts are just clotted, David. There's such a backlog, and you can be legitimately an asylum seeker, and we can talk about this more, as you say, you know, another time without getting too much into the weeds. But I mean, these people are fleeing legitimate threats that might fall legitimately into the category of them ending up as asylees, but they are never going to get their day in court just because the court system is so backed up. Similarly, you make such a good point about the photo ops that Fox News Channel and other quote, conservative or right-wing media will exploit at the border. But that said, to be fair, we do have a crisis at the border. I mean, those states that are border states are where there really is an influx of immigration to the point that those states are being choked off by all of this immigration and these people who are ending up there in different capacities, meaning some of them have places to go, some of them don't. I mean, the stories can be heart-wrenching and they can also be disturbing, and they can also involve violence. I'm sympathetic on some level to this crisis. And as you correctly identify, we have not taken, neither party has taken an aggressive posture. Instead, they've used this crisis at the border for a political ends, and we end up where we are. I do have a kind of a technical question because I'm just curious. How does SCOTUS, on what legal hook do they hang keeping these Title 42 restrictions in place?
Well, our courts sit both in law and what was called equity. And in equity, courts are allowed to do something that's just fair in the situation, even though it might not be spelled out precisely in the law. So the Supreme Court also sits as a court of equity. And when you're going to issue an injunction or a stay, you have to look at the likely merits. In other words, what side's going to win and what side's going to lose. I would say, just looking at this as a lawyer, I think that the Republican governors that have brought this action and have gotten the stay, I think they're likely to lose because immigration is a federal responsibility and it's a congressional responsibility. So I think they're going to lose on the merits. But one of the other things that's balanced is the harms, the balance of harms. And I guess when you look at the balance of harms, if they were right, let's say the governor of Texas were correct, some of the other people that this huge mass of people are going to go into their states, those folks can say that they have a very imminent harm, that it's going to start happening if they hadn't granted the stay on December 27th or 28th, whatever day, just a few days ago, it would have otherwise ended. and these large number of people would have come into their state. So I think on that level, I think that's what to the extent that the five made a principled decision, I think it was that while the Republican governors might not have been that strong on the merits, they were very strong on an imminent harm that if they end up being wrong, okay, so the people will come in 2 months, because the Supreme Court did say they were going to expedite the case, Mark, and they said they were going to hear it in February. And as I say, the Biden administration did not go down kicking and screaming, no stay, take it off right away, let the people come in. Title 42 is just a fig leaf at this point. There's really no health emergency. That's what I think the liberals would have wanted them to say, but it's not what the Biden administration actually said. And of course, that's because of the tension between the left and the more moderate wing of the Democratic Party and how they feel about immigration, public interest from one side, and of course the humanitarian thing that nobody wants to minimize. As you get close to any one of these stories, so many of them are heartbreaking. And the other side of it is that we just can't take in every heartbreaking case in the world. We really would be inundated.
Yeah, and so our circumstance and predicament. Great breakdown. Thank you, David. So we're talking to David Katz, the former Assistant U.S. Attorney, and I'm looking at different, there's a political spin to all of this as well. And somebody was making the point that if you let refugees in, they come largely from Latin American countries, strongly Catholic, they're anti-gay, they'll likely end up voting Republican. There's a whole 3D chess that's being played out in the chat. That I'm going to put aside for another time. I just was curious, and when David's here, I like to know about the legal machinations on some level. So I want to ask you about the Mark Meadows thing, the revelations from the J6 committee that Mark Meadows was regularly destroying documents and burning all of these documents, the government documents, so they're the people's property. So we've seen the last president basically jack 11,000 documents, or was it 11? I don't know how many. He took a bunch, 1,100, 11,000, whatever it was, to Mar-a-Lago and to other places too. We're not even sure where all the documents are or what they all are. That's another controversy. And now Mark Meadows destroying these documents. That seems to me to be obviously a cover-up. But might there be legal high ground for him, and what will likely be his legal exposure?
Well, Mark Meadows is in trouble on a lot of other fronts. He was the last White House chief of staff. He seemed to have been a real cheerleader for the coup. He sent a lot of messages, both that came into him, but also that went out from him, that are going to get him, I think, in a lot of trouble. He also defied his subpoena, but he was one of those people who was not prosecuted for contempt. And now when you add to that, he's also got trouble down in Georgia because he was sent into Georgia as the emissary for Trump during that famous find me 11,000 more votes, which meant concoct those votes down in Georgia. And then Meadows went down there along with Giuliani. So Meadows is in real trouble on many, many fronts. I think that he probably has quite a few criminal defense attorneys on his payroll right now trying to figure out what to do. And now he's got this latest this latest hit from Cassidy Hutchinson describing the fact, and she ought to know, that he was putting documents in the White House little fireplace there at the time that the coup was being plotted. In fact, after 2 meetings with this congressman, I think his name is Scott Perry, right. Maybe. I think
it was. Yeah. Sorry.
He was one of the people who was saying that, it could be decided by the states, that Pence shouldn't count the votes that came in from the slates, all of that. After 2 meetings with him, 2 separate meetings, on both of those occasions, Meadows burned documents. That's a terrible look. They didn't have to be presidential records. That would be, if he burned presidential records, he would have violated the Presidential Records Act. But if he burned anything that was pertinent to this investigation, it looks like it was obstruction of justice. It looks like if we succeed at the coup, I'll have a great memory of it. And if we don't succeed at the coup, I won't leave behind fingerprints or evidence that are going to get me in the penitentiary, and it's going to send Representative Scott Perry maybe there along with me.
And by the way, Perry is the guy who was also involved in trying to engineer the coup. So as is noted by David Katz, they were co-conspirators or co-conspiracists, whatever the word is, in all of this. Conspirators. Thank you very much. That seems like a ding word. Yeah. So he's you think, in a world of legal trouble. And when you say that, you don't mean, look, he's broken the law. I mean, that seems on its face to be the case. But you mean also that he's likely to be held to account by the law?
I think that Meadows is one of the ones at this point likely to be indicted by the special prosecutor. I think that they'll see that he's one of the logical links in the chain that goes up to Trump. I think they'll try to flip him along with Giuliani. Meadows may not be as loyal to Trump as people think. And of course, as soon as Trump's star starts to diminish, which I think it is, and people see that as long as they see that he really might be the next president, they're looking forward to the pardon. Even someone like the Oath Keeper, Rhodes, he hopes that, by 2024, Trump will be back in office and he can pardon him. He might do a few years in jail before then. But, what's his motive to flip? If he flips on Trump, like if Meadows flips on Trump, they've burned the only bridge that was left. As long as Trump's around and has the pardon power, Mark, right? They figure, okay, that's my ace in the hole. But I think that is becoming less and less of a possibility. I don't see somebody like, let's say, DeSantis. DeSantis won't owe them anything. It's got to be Trump himself to win, to give them the pardon, I'm pretty sure. And I think that they're beginning to realize, I'm a criminal defense attorney now. I do a lot of federal cases. It is a powerful thing when the feds say that you're a target and they go after you with the FBI agents or IRS agents or both of them in the same case, which is what I have often. And, I try to present the best defense I can, and hopefully the facts and the law are on my side, and I try to develop what I can. But it is not an easy thing for someone like Meadows when you have 5 or 6 different levels of criminal investigation that could all put you in jail, and you have this huge pressure. And I'm sure his lawyers will tell him that one thing that he could do is to flip and tell what he really knows about Trump. And if somebody like Meadows did that, it would be so valuable to the prosecutor. You can't really imagine that Meadows would ever serve a day in jail if he could provide credible testimony with corroboration against a former president that would make a case against him. I don't know how many people, even if they're angry at what Meadows did, thinks that that's not fair. If he really testifies honestly, thoroughly, in the opinion of a federal judge, should Meadows really go to jail at this stage in his life if he makes amends in that way? And I think that that's what a lot of his lawyers are telling him. He may have other lawyers. Remember, this Cassidy Hutchinson had a Trumpy lawyer, and she eventually got rid of her Trumpy lawyer. And now he's potentially in trouble for some of the Trumpy advice that he may have given her, which was in Trump's best interest, but not in Miss Cassidy Hutchinson.
Well, he was suggesting that she perjure herself. I mean, suggesting that she lie. Is essentially, which will, I guess, get you disbarred at minimum. I want to put the Santos thing aside till we visit next week. But I love this conversation, as usual, David. You broke down the SCOTUS decision so well and this Meadows exposure. Such a treasure to have you. I really appreciate you being part of things. We inherited you from Pat Thurston, and it was her best gift to us for this past year. Thank you. Happy New Year, and we'll talk next week.
Happy New Year to you and everyone else on your show, and great to be with you, Mark.
All right. David Katz, everybody. Yeah.